Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. Hi, thanks for tuning in again to Armor of God, and as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. And hopefully what we have put together for you here will be edifying for you. And the following clips are from my most recent interview with Father Joseph Iannuzzi. He has also agreed to do another interview in July, so I will ask another 10 questions then. Apart from that, there's going to be an interview with Father Joshua Waltz on June 27th, as well as Father Vincent Lampert on July 11th.
And when you belong to him, when you completely belong to him, everything changes. When you fall in love with God, it changes everything. It changes what you read, what you watch, what you buy, who your friends are, how you spend your weekends, how you spend your money, how you treat your family, your spouse, your kids. It changes everything.
With Father Waltz, I'll be focusing on vocations, while with Father Lampert, it's going to be exorcism-related subjects. So thanks to all of you for making this possible. I cannot thank all of you enough. Anyway, let's get back to this interview with Father Iannuzzi. So I'll kick this off with this. When the angels are speaking to the people, and I must also share a little background here. We know of so many saints in the past who have their own diaries. Sometimes it's Jesus himself speaking to them. Other times, it's through the angels.
That's a good point. According to this diary, the guardian angel related this to her. Now, the guardian angels cannot say anything that's not consistent with the will of God because they enjoy the beatific vision, which renders them impeccable, immutable. They participate in God's impeccability, immutability, and so forth. So even though it may have come through the angel, it was inspired, we assume, by God. And remember, Gemma Galgani, she also underwent diabolic attacks. Sometimes she would look at the food and see worms and wouldn't eat because the devil tried to tempt her that way. And she knew how to discern God's spirit from the bad spirit. But even the saints, sometimes when they write, they have to use their own words. You see, oftentimes when God reveals himself, he reveals himself through a light of infused knowledge and not with words. And one way, and the most common way, is without words. So it's sort of like you getting, in a split second, a treasure trove of knowledge that causes you to ponder and reflect and contemplate for the next week. This profound information is given to you in the substance of your soul, but no words are given, just information like images, patterns of thought. But you now have to come up with the words and articulate what you experience. That oftentimes is how Gemma received messages. So she uses these words like opinion, but it's not like she literally heard those words from the angel.
Now, to be more specific for the rest of this video, I'll break the interview down into questions. And so the first question is, why does it seem like we're referring to St. Thomas a lot on the matters of faith?
Good question. Well, two answers to that question. Number one, because many popes have recommended Thomas's theology, in particular his Summa Theologica, because it is a masterpiece. Now, Ratzinger was not a great fan of the way that Thomas used the philosophy with the theology, but he also commended Thomas in many respects. So did Francis, Pope Francis, the present pontiff, so did John Paul II, Leo XIII, Benedict XV, and the list goes on and on. So he's well known among the pontiffs as a great theologian. He's called the angelic doctor, among other things. The second answer is because we in the Western world are heavily saturated, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, but it's simply factual. We're heavily saturated with scholasticism. If you go to the Eastern world, you won't find it like that. You'll find it patristic, very Greek theology. The first 1,000 years of Catholicism were predominantly Greek theology. We're predominantly under the tutelage of Greek theologians, patristic thinkers. The second 1,000 years of theology were mostly scholastics in Latin. So we went from the Greek patristic theology of the first 1,000 years of the church to the Western Latin scholastic theology of the West. And now the schism, as they call it, the separation of the East and West happened in 1054, almost right in the middle of the 2,000 years. So there was this transition in the Western world, which includes, those not just geographically those countries of America, Western Europe, but even those ideologically united there too, like the Philippines and Kerala, parts of India that are very Catholic. And therefore, in the seminaries, in the novitiate houses, in the catechetical schools, in your Catholic school systems, it's mostly scholastic. And guess who stands out as the leading scholastic theologian? Thomas Aquinas. Certainly there was Bonaventure, who was a contemporary of Aquinas and no less great. In fact, Cardinal Ratzinger preferred Bonaventure over Aquinas. He says that several times. But they're both great. And I appreciate them both equally.
The second question is about near-death experience. In fact, a lot of you submitted questions related to NDE, so I asked him, what should we think about near-death experience? Is it safe to believe or trust the many stories of those who have shared their near-death experiences before?
Well, certainly there are a lot of near-death experiences that are authentic, and even some doctors who had no belief in God before these events began to believe afterwards. And I know a few people that have had this experience as well. So it's authentic. But remember, wherever there's truth, there's always someone trying to take advantage of it. So sometimes you have people presenting themselves as someone who's experienced this kind of event, but what do? They make money off of it. Once you see a person using a spiritual event to profit, something's not quite right there. And this is why in recent months, just about a month ago, in fact, the dicastery for the doctrine of faith put out new norms on discerning true from false supernatural phenomena. And this is a supernatural phenomenon, near-death experience, right? Some people have a vision of God, some of the devil, they were taken to hell, right? Like, yeah, I know quite a few names, but I won't mention them here.
The third question is about destination weddings. Well, we're living in a time when couples want to get married somewhere romantic, the beach, garden weddings. So the question is, are weddings held outside of the church, such as the beach, gardens valid?
Well, only with the consent of the local ordinary, canon law states, and the local ordinary is the bishop. Only with the consent of the bishop can a wedding take place outside of the church. And the church is the normal place of the sacraments being celebrated. Why? Because it's the house of God and it's a sacred ceremony. There may be exceptions, for example, on the point of death. Let's say a marriage is in the hospital, that can be permitted. Or between mixed religions, let's say one spouse is a Protestant or not, and one is a Catholic or not. And the bishop can give permission for the priest or a deacon to preside while the minister presides as well, and it could be in, let's say, a civil place. So these exceptions to the norm happen only with the bishop's permission. But the question you ask is, are they valid if they're done outside the church or on a beach or on another place? Yes, as long as the norms put in place by canon law are followed and with the consent of the bishop, it is valid. But now suppose they do it without the bishop's consent. Is it valid? It's valid, but it's illicit. See, what makes the marriage valid is the consent of the mutual consent of the spouses, not the priest. Okay, yes, there's a canonical form he recites. Let me very briefly give an overview of what makes the sacraments, all the sacraments, valid and invalid. Matter and form. What is the matter of baptism? Water. What is the form? The invocation of the three divine persons. Now, if one of the two is missing, it's invalid. If both are present, it's valid. So if you, instead of using water, let's say you use Coca-Cola, right, that should be invalid just for that reason itself. No, but it has to be water and the invocation of the Trinity. Same thing with, let's say, confession. What is the matter? The matter is contrition on the part of the penitent. And what is the form? The words of absolution of the priest. With regard to marriage, what is the matter? The mutual consent of the two spouses. And what is the form? The canonical form the priest recites. Now, how do you know that the matter is truly present when it's something intangible and invisible like mutual consent? And the answer to that is why we have so many annulments today. Because sometimes people go into a marriage without being completely transparent with the other concerning something that could invalidate it, but they don't reveal it. For example, I want to marry this person, but I have a hidden child somewhere. And if I tell my bride to be this, they won't want to marry me. Right from the start, that's invalid. Because if there's something you're withholding that could alter the decision of the bride-to-be, and you don't reveal that, that makes the bond invalid, you see. It could be, an addiction, a gambling addiction that you're hiding, and that if the other bride-to-be knew or bridegroom-to-be knew, would change the outcome of the decision, mutual consent. It could be anything. So considering that the mutual consent is present and that the priest recites the canonical form, it's a valid marriage wherever it is.
The fourth question is this: are married couples still husbands and wives in heaven? Because it says there's no marriage in heaven.
Yeah, Jesus said that, right? To the Pharisees and to the disciples when he was asked. I think the case was with Tobit, right? There was the son of Tobias, and he was about to marry this woman, and she had 7 other husbands, and they all died. And the question was, which spouse would there be to accompany her in heaven? And Jesus said, there is no giving over to marriage in heaven, because they become like angels. And it's true, because in heaven there's no physical procreation and therefore no marriage. But the bond established on earth in marriage remains throughout eternity in heaven, provided both spouses make it to heaven. Now, Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich makes this assertion. She states that in heaven, the bonds established on earth remain for all eternity in such a way that the angels and the saints acknowledge that those two people had a special bond on earth, whether it's husband-wife, father-son, mother-daughter, spiritual, what do they call them, like spiritual partner, not partners, I don't like that word, it makes it sound like almost like wedlock, but spiritual friends, like Blessed Jordan and Blessed Diana. Here we have a a superior general of the Dominicans, successor to the founder, St. Dominic, who had a very intimate relationship, but completely pure and chaste, with one of the nuns named Blessed Diana. And it's not very well circulated, but among the religious, quite a few know. I would imagine their bond is special in heaven too. Yeah.
I've shared with all of you before a clip of Father Yanusi explaining why the belief in reincarnation, a belief of the Hindu, is of the devil. So for this interview, I asked him about Yin and Yang instead.
Yeah, Yin and Yang, that's from the Chinese culture, right? Reincarnation is more from the Hinduist Buddhist culture, and Hinduism, which gave rise to Buddhism, began, I believe, in which is a small region of India. But there's a difference between a philosophy and a theology. Reincarnation is a theology. Yin Yang is more of a philosophy. And the reason I said reincarnation is of the devil is because it deceives people to the bitter end. They think that they can have a second chance, and if they don't, and if their time's up for all eternity, that's really a disservice to them. And yeah, Yin Yang is similar in that they don't have a personal God. It's like a force throughout the cosmos, sort of similar to what you refer to in New Age as cosmic energy, something like that. Forces of good, forces of evil, and they somehow work together unknowingly, as it were. But I'm not an expert on Yin Yang, but yeah, I was thinking, yes, it's a philosophy, Yin Yang, unlike reincarnation, which is a theology. And therefore, reincarnation is dangerous because it puts your soul in peril thinking you have a second chance, whereas in reality, you don't. And Yin Yang instead is a philosophy from China that describes opposing but interconnecting self-perpetuating cycles that can be thought of as complementary and opposing forces that interact. And yeah, but it doesn't have any place in the Christian philosophy or theology because our God in both is a personal God. Whereas in the Yin Yang philosophy, the universe creates itself out of sort of like a chaos or material energy. And this sort of like organized energy cycles of Yin Yang form matter and form passive and contractive, etc. But yeah, it doesn't have a place in terms of a personal relationship with the creator of the cosmos and of all the energy therein.
And for the next question is about unbaptized babies who died probably due to abortion or miscarriage. And it has something to do with what Father Carlos Martin said before, that unbaptized babies belong to the devil due to original sin, to the sin of Adam. So I've asked Father Vincent Lampert about this before, and one of you told me that I should instead ask a theologian on this, because Father Lampert is not a theologian. He's an exorcist and a parish priest. So questions like this should be better addressed by someone like Father Iannuzzi instead.
Yes, the first question, unbaptized babies do not belong to the devil. All we have to do is read Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger's statement on this. He said they are not responsible for original sin, which they did not commit. They inherit it by conception. That's not a personal sin. So Cardinal Ratzinger goes on to say that they are not denied the glory of heaven, the unbaptized babies. And I spoke earlier of the three types of baptism. And if we look at the babies that were martyred at the time of Christ's birth in Ramah, where Herod tried to kill all the firstborn, they're declared martyrs. Some people say, well, how can they be martyrs when they didn't even attain the age of reason? They didn't deliberately give their lives for Christ, but yet the church considers them martyrs. Now, when a woman procures an abortion, I would say the majority of women don't realize that they are making a sacrifice to Satan. Why do I say this? Because in that child is a potential of millions of virtuous and divine acts that increase the accidental glory of creation, that creation is being deprived of through that abortion. So by snatching those acts in the future that the child, when it attains the age of reason, can give God, even in its tender years, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, whatever, are being stolen. And the parents don't realize this, that are procuring this abortion. And in that sense, it is truly a sacrifice to Satan, but the parents may not be aware of this. So the child is not guilty of any original sin. So it's not the possession of the devil. And if it dies in that state of unbaptized innocence, it does not go to hell. Nowhere in the church's teaching will you find this. For many years, scholastic theologians created a theory, not a truth, a theory of limbo that Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, in his book entitled The Ratzinger Report, shot down. He said, theologians of the West came up with an idea, since baptism is necessary for salvation, and the unborn babies are not baptized, they cannot make it to heaven, so they end up not in hell, but in this place called limbo. Cardinal Ratzinger, rightly so, stated there's no theological foundation for this theory of limbo. And back then, of course, it was not articulated that there were different types of baptism. See, the scholastics, when they came up with this theory, not all of them, some, were assuming that you had to be only sacramentally baptized to get to heaven. And Lumen Gentium of the Second Vatican Council, Article 16, clarified that there are different types of baptism by which someone may enter heaven. And I addressed that in another area. Baptism of desire, baptism of blood, and baptism of sacrament.
And I also asked him about the unbaptism ceremony by the satanic cults out there. Is it really? Can someone really be unbaptized?
So as you see, I got my unbaptism certificate here from the Temple of Satan. You can get unbaptized from the Temple of Satan for just $10.
No, once is baptized, they can never be unbaptized. It's sort of like, well, first of all, baptism is an indelible character impressed upon the soul for all eternity, like the priesthood. No one can take it away. Even the priesthood of Judas Iscariot could not be taken away. It's sort of like trying to get the toothpaste back into the tube. It can never be done.
The last two questions that I'm going to share here, Father Iannuzzi provided quite a lengthy explanation, and that is why I placed these two at this part of the video. So the first of the two is this: why do a lot of Catholics have issues with Vatican II, and why did Vatican II take place in the first place? Some even go on saying that any pope after the Vatican II is invalid. This seems clear to me a work of the devil, who plant this kind of thinking in the heads of the Catholics that are saying this.
Yeah, it's a valid question and a very pertinent one in these end times, because St. Paul who foresaw that the rebellion would take place in the end times before the man of lawlessness is revealed in 2 Thessalonians, knew that there would be this division within the church. So this rebellion that's taking place within the church, not without, but within, that's what apostasy in Greek means, rebellion from within the church, has a lot to do with people separating themselves from the magisterium and Rome, and this is dangerous. I think the quick answer to your question, why did the church have Vatican II, is under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, which is the answer as to why it always has a council. Yes, there were practical reasons, and that is an answer to the changing moral, bioethical, technological advancements that are happening in these modern times that did not happen 100 years ago. In the last 150 years, there's been more technological advancement than in the last 6,000 combined. So the church had to not keep up with the times, that's a bad answer, but articulate answers to new questions that did not exist before, like in vitro fertilization, colonization, etc. Also, Pope John the 23rd, who is a saint, he stated that we have to open up a window because the church needs the Holy Spirit to breathe in it. And lo and behold, not only he, but his successor, Pope John Paul II, employed the expression new Pentecost. We need a new Pentecost. And shortly thereafter, after they began using these expressions, Jesus began to reveal himself, using these very expressions in the writings of mystics, blesseds, venerables, servants of gods, and saints that are approved by the church, like Blessed Elizabeth of the Holy Trinity, Blessed Dina Belanger, Venerable Conception Convera de Armida, Luisa Picaretta, Saint Faustina, Father Gobi, Father Padre Pio. They talk about this new Pentecost. And I think that the reason why they criticize Vatican II is because for many centuries, the liturgy was always in Latin in the Western world, okay? And even though the Orthodox have the same 7 valid sacraments as the Catholics and believe 99% of what Catholics believe, and Pope John Paul II called the Orthodox another lung in the one mystical body of Christ, the second of which is the Western Church, even though these statements have been made, we have to remember that the liturgy did not start in Latin. It started in Aramaic. You know, I love the Latin Mass, and what I'm about to say is in no way disrespectful to it. In fact, I have faculties to celebrate in the extraordinary form, the ordinary form, and the Byzantine form. Okay, Byzantine is basically the Orthodox Mass, but under the Pope. And the oldest liturgy was not Latin; it was Aramaic. And if you want to know which liturgy most resembles that of the apostles, it is not the Latin Mass, it is not the Novus Ordo English Mass. It is the Orthodox Mass. That most resembles the Mass of the Apostles. St. John Chrysostom updated it. You know, there were several revisions done to the Orthodox Mass over the centuries. But my point is, I think a lot of times people, when they see that the Mass started to change from Latin to the vernacular, they blame it on Vatican II. But the truth is, it didn't happen in Vatican II. It didn't happen during Vatican II. This adaptation of the Mass to the vernacular language. In fact, even the priest turning his back to the people and facing the people, that did not happen during Vatican II. It happened after Vatican II, right? And Pope Paul VI, who is a saint, I think it was 1967, wrote a decree in which he allowed that. But remember, you won't find in Vatican II anything of the church saying you must remove the altar rails, you must remove the tabernacle from the center of the church, you must admit altar girls. Nothing of that is in Vatican II documents. This is all something that came later at the request of the Episcopal convents of bishops, etc., etc. So my point is, I think they're confused. They don't know the facts, they don't know the dates of events, and they all simplify it and say Vatican II is responsible for all this, but it's not. Vatican II is a very good council, and it was very much needed, in my opinion. And those people who say that all the popes after Vatican II are invalid, again, contradict church doctrine. All they have to do is go to the first Vatican Council that happened, was it 1869 to 1870, and read what it states in the first Vatican Council. It states, whoever succeeds the chair of St. Peter, whoever, it doesn't say these specific people, means any person who is ordained, who is consecrated pontiff. Whoever succeeds the chair of Peter or obtains the primacy of Peter over the whole church, so that what the truth has ordained stands firm, and blessed Peter perseveres in the rock-like strength he was granted, and does not abandon the guidance of the church which he once received. And that the clergy and faithful of whatever right and dignity are bound to submit to this Petrine power by the duty of hierarchical subordination in true obedience, not blind obedience. And this not only in matters of concerning faith and morals, but also in those which regard the discipline and government of the church throughout the world. It doesn't mean the Pope is infallible on the weather, on sporting events, on medicine or vaccines or borders. No, it talks about just morals, faith, discipline, and governance of the church, not of the world. And the Second Vatican Council that took place between 62 and 65 of last century stated that the religious assent of the will and intellect is to be given in a special way to the authentic teaching authority of the pontiff, even when he is not speaking ex cathedra. Okay? So we must always respect this authority that comes from God through the Vicar of Christ. And all the bishops have an obligation to be in union with him. And when they are not, their authority depreciates. This is found in the Catholic Catechism. I think it's Article 895, that the authority of the bishops must be exercised in communion with the Vicar of Christ and the whole church.
And the other question is about Saint Gemma. In her diary is written the following. Saint Gemma's guardian angel ordered her to write the following. Remember, daughter, that whoever truly loves Jesus speaks little and bears all things. I command thee, on behalf of Jesus, to always refrain from giving your own opinion, unless it is asked, always to prefer silence to upholding your own views. So then my question is this applicable to all of us as well, or was it specific to Saint Gemma only, and should we then refrain from giving our own opinions?
The word that is used here is opinion. That's a key word. It doesn't say, for example, founded concern or decisions taken in discernment. It says opinion. Opinion means something that is not grounded necessarily upon reflection, discernment, or truth. Number two, a similar example is in the life of Saint Faustina. When the nuns with whom she lived, not all but a few, vexed her, gave her difficulty, and God exhorted Faustina to be very merciful with them. And one day Faustina replied to God saying, but they're taking advantage of my mercy and goodness. And God's response to her was, that is not a concern of yours. I will deal with that. I'm paraphrasing. But the question is, well, does that apply to all the things Faustina does? Should she always let people walk over her like a doormat? Of course not. Should we always keep silent and let people speak things even if they're wrong and make their decisions even if we know it's wrong? Of course not. So if our opinion is grounded in the truth and the result of discernment or even counsel, then we have an obligation to speak. And this is in the Catholic Catechism. It's in the Church's moral casuistry, moral teaching. I'll give you a few examples. Mother Teresa of Calcutta, whom I met twice. She joined a community of nuns, Dorothean sisters, and she decided to leave the community in which she had made vows to establish a community that was more devoted to the poor. So initially, her Mother Superior refused her consent, and Mother Teresa of Calcutta waited, consulted with her bishop in India, and after over a year, finally the Mother Superior said, okay, you can go. Now, suppose Mother Teresa kept quiet and didn't express any of her opinion. She would have never founded this community of the Missionaries of Charity. She followed what the Lord put in her heart, so she should have spoken, and she did. Another example is Father Benedict Rochelle, or Charles de Foucauld, St. Ignatius of Loyola. These are founders who had listened to the voice of God and acted upon it, but always with seeking counsel and discernment. So when the Lord talks about opinion, he's not referring to a decision expressed that is founded upon counsel and discernment. He's not talking about that. Take, for example, also the Blessed Virgin Mary herself. When the angel Gabriel appeared to her and told her that she would become the Mother of God, did she say, yes? No, she didn't. She said, how is this possible? She questioned. And that is because she did not simply want to obey blindly with her will without her intellect, but with both. She wanted to give a complete human consent of mind and body to God's fiat. by giving him her own fiat with her mind and with her will. And then there's this heresy back in the 17th century of Quietism that was condemned by the church. Quietism was proposed by a Spanish priest by the name of Miguel de Molinas, and it denied the necessity of human activity in one's own sanctification. In other words, you don't express your opinion, you don't speak, you just do whatever you're told. And the church has condemned that approach of Quietism. Quietism asserts that the highest spirituality is attained when the mind and the will are completely inactive, sort of like a doormat. Now, Pope Pius XI condemned 68 propositions of the founder of this movement, so to speak, Miguel de Molinas. And so the point is, this applies to Faustina especially, but it means opinion and not so much decisions taken in discernment.
And I'll stop with this when I also had asked Father Iannuzzi to clarify about the difference between being obedient to the church and blind obedience.
The First Vatican Council spoke about the importance of obedience and how Christians are to obey. I'll give you just a few examples. Gaudium et Spes, number 17. This is the hope and joy, Gaudium et Spes in Latin, the Second Vatican Council document. Number 17 of this conciliar document states that obedience to God is not, as some would believe, a heteronomy. Heteronomy means a military obedience. You just blindly obey as if the moral life was subject to the will of something absolute, extraneous, intolerant of one's own freedom. So the church condemned this idea of blind obedience. It even stated that such a heteronomy would be nothing but a form of alienation, contrary to God's divine wisdom and to the dignity of the human person. In other words, God made no one to be a doormat. Human dignity requires man to act through conscious and free choice. And if God puts something in his heart that may change a bad situation to good, he has an obligation to say it. Okay? And another document that reiterates this teaching on the church's informed and not blind obedience is the Apostolic Exhortation Vita Consecrata by Pope John Paul II the Great. In number 43 of this Apostolic Exhortation, Vita Consecrata, which is consecrated life in English, he stated that authority must be above all fraternal and spiritual, while those entrusted with it must know how to involve their brothers and sisters in the decision-making process, meaning that the superior is not supposed to blindly command the subject. Because, for example, let's take a superior who tells the student, jump off the third floor building because I told you. Would you do it? Of course not. It's sinful to take one's own life in that way. In fact, I was asked when I was a seminarian in Italy in 1991 by the novice master who was training us in the vows of poverty, chastity, obedience. I said, concerning obedience, what if you told me to jump off the top of a fifth floor building? Am I supposed to obey you? And he said to me, what would you do? And I said to him, I would say after you. And he smiled and he said, good answer. And that's the way we are to engage in this dialogue, whether it's Gemma Galgani with her peers or her elders, or just with a religious and a superior, or even among ourselves, parents and children and so forth.
Well then, that will be all for the video this time. I hope you have learned a lot from this interview. I'm sorry I can't ask more questions, because usually Father Iannuzzi has about an hour for me to do this. But don't worry, there's going to be another interview with him next month, and I'll be asking more questions then. I'll try to ask him if he's okay to do this on a monthly basis, granted that his schedule allows him to do so. In any case, I hope you've enjoyed this interview, and if there's any feedback or suggestion, please don't hesitate to let me know in the comments below. Anyway, for those of you who'd like to support our works, and if you like the works we are doing, I left a link to our PayPal donation in the description box below, and from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much everybody for your continuous support, contribution, and prayers from day one. And until the next one, stay safe, stay healthy, and may God bless you.